Have you ever been to Scotland, Dag?
Once.
What was it like?
I remember it much as one recalls a dream. Or a nightmare.
Brian Limond, better known as Limmy, is one of the most successful and original comedians to come out of Scotland in the past few decades. He managed to garner significant attention on British TV with his surreal sketch comedy programme Limmy's Show, which grew out of the earlier podcast Limmy's World of Glasgow. Limmy's comedy is straight out of left field, unlike anything exactly. I guess you could find parallels to Chris Morris's Brass Eye in its surrealism.
You're wrong, and you're a grotesquely ugly freak.
And at a stretch Harry Enfield for its satirical characters. While the show ended in 2013, Limmy remains popular to this day for his live streams on Twitch TV, in which he, among other things, constructs elaborate murder machines in Minecraft.
Your daddy's on fire. This isn't right, isn't it, no? This isn't right, no?
The comments are usually pretty samey, and occasionally quite amusing.
The fucking patter on here's brilliant, mate.
Unfortunately, however, his comment sections have caught a major case of that fucking god-awful colon format that seems to be every single comment on YouTube for the past 2 sodding years. For all Limmy's widespread, even international popularity, he hasn't curated his speech to be more amenable to non-Scottish ears. As a result, Limmy's Show is a decidedly regional programme. The thick Glasgow accents of Limmy and all the cast of the show are a real barrier not just internationally, but even within the UK itself.
Sun comes up, so it's time to get the heat done. Just ready to crash out when Jeremy Kyle comes on. Looked like a good one, so I set it to tape. And it's a go like a light.
The show is spoken mostly in what is referred to as the Glasgow Patter. This is essentially a situation of what's called diglossia between two poles. Western Scottish English on one side and Central Scots on the other. What's Scots? Scots is a West Germanic language, or dialect according to some people, which developed parallel to English out of the Northumbrian dialect of Old English. While it's as close as any other language gets to English, it is very difficult to understand without enough exposure. Diglossia often entails mediating one's dialect around those from other locations or class backgrounds or otherwise linguistically removed from oneself. And so at the other end of the spectrum we have the most unmediated form of speech. This is exactly what we have in Limmy's Show. It's a Glasgow-made show for a Scottish audience. It's Scots speaking to other Scots, in Scots, sort of. Far from damaging the show's appeal, this uncompromising approach is a huge part of what makes the show what it is. Would it be the same if instead of "She's turned the ways against us," we got "She has manipulated the children against my person"? The Glasgow Patter isn't just a variety of speech, it's a whole world in its own way. It's an idiom of human experience, and the programme benefits enormously from this strong and distinctive sense of identity. In an age when English dialects are rapidly converging throughout the UK, and when people so often mediate their native accent for the sake of wider appeal, it's refreshing indeed to watch and hear something so unabashedly itself. While for Glaswegians it's a part of their contemporary culture, and something they can call their own, the rest of us who love the show aren't put off by the initial difficulty in understanding it. On the contrary, we get a huge amount out of it. Alongside the comedy, we get an insight into Scottish culture. It's like when one learns a new language, you're immersed in something fascinatingly different from what you're used to. And besides, I think the Glasgow accent is quite beautiful.
Excuse me, mate, is it 2 Glasgow's full of specky bams? Cough, you prick. What?
So why's the Glasgow Patter so hard to understand? Please forgive me, Scotland. To find out, let's look at one of the most famous sketches from the show.
Alright, mate. Alright. You lost? Lost? No, mate, cheers. It's just you don't look like you're in here, no?
This first clip has many interesting features about it. Let's first take a look at this word, fé. Now, if you're not familiar with Scottish English, this might completely throw you and you might have absolutely no idea what it means, but it's pretty clear from context here that it means from. And this is a variant of the Scots word fré. It would seem safe to assume that this in itself is just a Scottish variant of the English word from, but you'd be surprised to learn that while the two are related ultimately, they do not have quite so close an etymological relationship as you might suppose. So it seems as though fré comes from the Old Norse word fra. Now, the Northumbrian dialect of Old English was heavily influenced by Old Norse during the time of the Danelaw, more so than other Old English dialects, although you do see influence from Old Norse in a lot of English vocabulary. For instance, the word they is not descended from an Old English word. In Old English we have hiu, and that was supplanted by the Old Norse þeir. And then we see this quite famous vowel difference between Standard English and Scots, or Scots-influenced dialect, where in modern English we have the diphthong ow. In Scotland they have this singular vowel oo, and this actually preserves an earlier form of this vowel from before what's called the Great Vowel Shift, which is when all the vowels in English changed a great deal over a few centuries. In many ways, Scotland was less affected or differently affected than England was by the Great Vowel Shift, and this produces a huge number of the differences in pronunciation. This is one example of Scottish English actually preserving an earlier English sound, and in many ways being more true to the sound of Old English. It's like how in Scotland you'll often hear hoose instead of house, which is far closer to the original Old English hoose.
I'm not just passing through.
Sat in your bag at a laptop, eh?
Aye.
I wish I had a laptop, man.
Aye, you're not missing much. You can take off the stuff on the phone nowadays, can't you?
Aye, you wouldn't miss it, innit?
Well, when I say that, I've got quite a lot of...
He's a fucking laptop!
Don't, mate.
I'm not your mate, he's a laptop.
Now, what jumps out to me when watching this is the sheer amount of what's called lenition going on. Now, lenition is when hard consonantal sounds are sort of eroded into what could be referred to as softer sounds during speech. In some languages like Irish, it's a full-on part of their phonology and how the language works altogether. But in English, it's more just an informal way of speaking which results in these elisions of consonants. For instance, like many British English speakers, I often replace T sounds with glottal stops, so I might end up saying bottle or butter, although when narrating a video I definitely try and avoid doing so. But the Glasgow dialect does that very much indeed. So instead of, "What is that in your bag? Is that a laptop? Yes?" we get, "Is that in your bag? A laptop, eh?" Then similarly to the abbreviation of "what's that" to "sat," we get the word "geez" from "geez a fucking laptop." Now this is doubly removed from Standard English because not only does it use the Scots word "gie," but it's also combined with "us," which in Standard English, of course, is the first-person plural dative pronoun, but in Scottish English it's often employed as the first-person singular, so "give us your laptop," "gee's your laptop." You'll also commonly find this in the northeast of England, but outside of Scotland and the northeast, I don't think it's used outside of idiomatic purposes. What's also interesting here is how "no," as in "I'm no your mate," which sounds very similar to the English word "no," and is actually written the same way, is actually equivalent to the word "not," rather than to the word "no" itself. Instead, the equivalent is "naw," spelled N-A-W. Like when Limmy says,
Lost? Nah, mate, cheers. Tell you what. How about I give you something more valuable on the laptop?
What?
My time.
On your time? On your laptop? I'll have your phone and all.
I know you're hunting.
What?
I know you're hunting.
Don't want me out.
Am I right?
Is there anything more Glasgow than the mugger saying, "What?" So again we got loads of lenition with, "Oh, man, your time. Why your laptop? And I'll have your phone and all." I have two remarks to make about this phrase at the end here. Firstly, it displays what's called L vocalization, where the L sound, the L, or all, as it's usually pronounced in Standard English at the end of words, is turned into a kind of W sound. It's vocalized. So you'll find this in many dialects of English in England as well, especially estuary or Cockney speech, or many modern speakers will say all instead of all, or ball instead of ball. So then and all becomes an all. The fact that it's realised as a kind of semi-vowel rather than as a consonantal L makes this in particular really hard to actually pick up and understand. To the untrained ear, it's very difficult to pick out what words were actually said there. apart from the phonology of how he says the phrase, we can also take a look at the phrase itself and what it means. Now, you can find this phrase "and all" throughout the UK. Wiktionary defines it as including every object, attribute or process associated with a preceding item or series of items. And the mugger here is using it basically with that sense. He's saying, I'll have your phone as well as your laptop and also your wallet, everything else on you. Your phone and all. But earlier on in the sketch he said, it's just you don't look like you're phone here and all. And there it has a quite different signification, which is only found, according to Wiktionary, in Northern England and Scotland, simply used to add emphasis, simply adding to the point. You could compare it to similarly redundant phrases like "in it," which is used in many parts of the UK. Like many other urban dialects, becomes in Halton instead of hurting. But something else notable about this word is it displays a very unique feature to Glasgow, which is a somewhat uvular rhotic sound, a r. To my knowledge, this only occurs post-vocalically, so after vowels, so you'll never hear a Glaswegian say red or something. They're not going to start sounding like Anthony Blanche. But this is quite different from a lot of other Scottish accents, which have a rhotic and trilled or tapped r, r or r. For instance, an Edinburgh accent saying the place name Edinburgh. This is one of the things which makes the Steel's Heavier Than Feathers sketch quite so funny, is how Limmy says the word feathers. Because it goes right into his throat, into his sort of uvula. It's feathers. The other R sound is present in a Glaswegian accent, like in the way Limmy says kilogram. But notably, they display this quite unique rhotic sound. I think it must be one of the most impenetrable features of the accent, because it's such a standout feature among accents of English from around the whole world. Lastly, let's take a look at some of the vowels which we heard here. So Limmy offers to give the man something more valuable than a laptop. Again, this is a Scots word, meer, and it's filtered through the Glasgow post-vocalic uvular rhotic to become mere. Again, Scots and English diverge greatly during the Great Vowel Shift, and this is one of the vowels which gets affected. You'll also have noticed how Limmy said amarang, originally from Old Norse rangur. Old English borrowed this word into rang, and then again the vowels diverged. Vowels generally are one of the most variable features of language from place to place. A lot of the accent differentiation between UK, Australia and America is all between these vowel differences, and it's the same between England and Scotland as well. But rather than simply being a different realisation of the same phoneme, like the American wrong instead of wrong in England, it's a completely different phoneme altogether. Amarang. I could go on for days, and let's face it, I already have, about the interesting features of this dialect and how it's represented in this show. But rather than going through an exhaustive list of every single difference between standard English and this dialect, I think there's just one more feature which I'll draw your attention to, which I find completely fascinating. Heard most notably in the What's Your Hang sketch, before the I sound, an unvoiced dental fricative that is a th sound, as in think or thing, can be replaced with an aspirated h sound, hence what's your hang rather than thing.
So, what's your hang?
My hang?
Aye, your hang.
I like to overanalyse the linguistics of television programmes and make videos about them on the internet.
That's good.
This is one of the things which I'd never heard before I watched Limmy's show. I had no idea that this was something that happened. I mean, we're all familiar with th fronting, which is where th and the sounds become f and v. I mean, there's YouTubers who do it all the time and have really annoyingly bad diction and yet somehow get paid to speak into a microphone for a living. But this is something fascinating to me which I'd never heard of. I hope that, if nothing else, this video has
Fucking
shown how different ways of speaking imbue such different character into pieces of media. Limmy's show just would not be the same without its characteristic Glaswegian sound. I mean, what would the Sopranos be without gabagool?
Gabagool. Over here.
All the attitude and surreal humour and everything else going on in the show is just bolstered by this extra character that it has, because it's spoken in such a regional manner. It's also an interesting reflection to link a piece of modern media to the actual lived history of language. I'm sure not many people have spoken about Old Norse and Old English in a video about Limmy's show before, but culture is lived through language, and this links us to our past. All the history which went into English and Scots and all the other languages involved has converged to create what we see in front of us. Every dialect and language is a unique way of being in the world, and hearing something which is at once so close but has so many features which are so different is really quite fascinating, I think. To the few of you who have made it this far, I'd like to thank you for listening and watching. I do hope you'll stick around and subscribe and all of that. It's been a very linguistics heavy few uploads, but that's not the sole topic I will cover on this channel, I'm sure. It's just what takes my fancy of late. So yeah, look forward to more of that, as well as plenty of other stuff, I'm sure. Thanks for taking the time, and I'll see you around.